So, how do you break into the whiskey industry? This is a question that I get a lot, and I'm going to give you one version of a path that I think is plausible. I'm Daniel Whittington. I'm the Chancellor at Wizard Academy and Whiskey Marketing School. In case you can hear it in the background, there's a bit of a hum. That's because they're doing construction on campus, and this is a live campus, and people do things here. So instead of waiting, we're going to shoot anyway. So this is a question that I get emailed all the time. Hey, I really want to have a career in whiskey. Do you have any recommendations on how I do that? And my first question is like, well, what do you want to do? If you want to distill or open your own distillery, then my answer is go to Moonshine University and take their 6-day distillers course. However, if you just want to work in the industry or for a craft distillery, there's a different path. And keep in mind, this is not the path for most like big corporate brand. Like if you want to go work for Brown-Forman, they're going to be way more serious about like resumes and history and degrees and things like that. But if you're talking about cracking into the craft industry, I think it's not that different than cracking into the music industry, which is another thing that I have a lot of experience with. So in 2009, I moved back to Texas and I moved to Austin. I was born and raised in Waco. I left Waco in 98 or 99, somewhere in there, and I didn't come back until 2009. And I'd spent that time touring and playing all over the world, and I moved back to Austin, not because like Austin's where you make it big, but because I had a son born with special needs, and Austin had family, but it also had one of the most world-class, children's hospitals in all of North America, Dell Children's Hospital. And so, since we were, about to be faced with and have now done 20 plus surgeries and countless medical things, we wanted to be somewhere where we could just drive to it instead of have to drive 3 hours to get to a decent hospital or take a flight, God forbid. But what that meant for me is I took a music career and I left an area where I had a band and friends and I was very connected to the music industry and moved to Austin, which seems like it should be easy because Austin's a music town, and it is. But Austin's also a college town, and artists in college towns, they change at a different speed than other cities change, as far as like the human makeup of things. And I landed in Austin thinking like, oh, I remember this town. I played shows here for a while. I didn't know anybody. and most of the clubs that I used to play at didn't exist anymore. I mean, you still had your core like, Saxon and the Continental and Antones and Stubbs, those were still going. But I wasn't trying to play those clubs. I mean, Saxon I played, but like some of the bigger clubs, like that just wasn't my scene at first. And there's a bunch of like small hole-in-the-wall stuff I wanted to kind of break into, and they didn't exist. So I was faced with this. Okay, I'm a musician. I've got a back catalog. I have a touring history. I've got a lot of resume-building stuff to hand to a club owner. But I don't know if you've ever done this in the music industry, but just showing up cold turkey to promoters and trying to get them to book you in clubs is a soul-sucking endeavor. It is brutal. And it's, it's part of the job, but it's brutal. So I didn't want to just play shows at clubs because no one knew who I was in Austin, and I wasn't famous as a musician enough that I could show up in town and reach out to my fans and start a whole movement. My fans in Austin numbered in the dozens. So what do? Well, this was my strategy. First thing is I spent a lot of time cruising around Austin, listening to live music and finding the clubs that I thought like, yeah, this club is a club I want to play. This place, this venue, this is a venue I want to play. And practically speaking, a venue I could get into. And they're not going to book me on Austin city limits. So the next thing I did was just start to go to as many shows as I could at those clubs. And I was going to 1-2 a week. And all I did was just show up, listen to the artists, buy merch, buy a drink, tip well, and get to become a familiar face. That took about 6 months of just showing up all the time and never asking for anything. And in the meantime, I played some one-off shows here and there to make some money and started to get my foothold into and keep my chops up. And then once I had done that, I started to identify a whole circle of musicians that I started to see playing together and singing in each other's bands and doing backup for each other, and or sitting in as a musician in each other's bands. And it was a community that I really thought was cool. And I was like, that's the group, that's the crew I want to be in. And so the first thing I did was I went to 2 of the clubs that I was like, yeah, these clubs are cool, really cool. And I figured out what night of the week was their worst night. And when I reached out to the promoter, what I said was, here's my whole resume. I want to play these nights, and I want the time slot you have a hard time filling. And so I took the worst night and the worst time slot. And it was easy. They were like, yeah, please, sure, why not? What do we have to lose? And then I brought, not a bunch, but, a couple dozen people to those shows. And a night that used to have like 3 people and no one show up, all of a sudden had 24 people buying drinks and hanging out. And the bar staff already knew me and liked me. And the owner was like, oh, cool, thanks, man. And then I said, hey, what if I took this crappy night that is not doing great for you, and I booked you the whole evening? And they're like, yeah, please. Well, what I know about musicians is that everyone's fighting for the Friday, Saturdays slots, and sometimes the Sundays, but mostly Fridays, Saturdays. And most of those musicians, they just want to play. And nobody has great Monday night, Tuesday night gigs. And so when you are approached as a musician by somebody saying, hey, no cost to you, no responsibility, do you want to show up and play a Monday night gig for 45 minutes at this legit club that you already know and you've already played at? The answer is almost always yes. And so I reached out to all those musicians I'd been getting to know and said, hey, you may remember me from your shows. I'm booking a night here at, man, what was the club that I really loved the most, but it's been gone for so long I can't even think of it anymore. Anyway, I'm booking a show here, and I've got 5 slots to fill. Do you want to play it? And then I would give myself the worst time slot. So I would usually start the night at like 6 or 7, and then there'd be 4 or 5 other artists playing all the nice slots. And they would bring all their fans, and it turned into this dead night for the club became an amazing night for the club. And not amazing, a good night for the club. And then I got to know those people, and then I started singing with them, and I started playing with them, and I started moving to different, better time slots, and then I would get legit shows at real clubs and a great time slot, and I would bring some of them along with me to play or to sing backup vocals. And it only took me 1 year to become an embedded part of that entire community, and a vital one. Within 2 years, I was producing shows for South by Southwest, and also playing really great shows. And some of those musicians are still really good friends of mine. I still do music with them. Why that story? Because I think getting into the craft whiskey industry, there's a very similar path available to you. But first, let's talk about the whiskey. I had to do it. This came out in January. This is the Traveler Whiskey, which is a partnership between Chris Stapleton, the Chris Stapleton, and Harlan Wheatley, who is the master distiller at Buffalo Trace. Now, the downside of this whiskey for everyone watching this channel, which is all of us whiskey nerds, is that they tell you jack about what's in the bottle. It is all marketing and all spiel, and they tell a cool story, which is we went through 50 blends, and we used all the distilleries we could at our disposal. Now remember, this is Sazerac, and they've got, this could come from half a dozen distilleries. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's just Buffalo Trace. And we don't even know what's in it. We just know it's a blend, which is a choice they made. Now, in American whiskey, a blend can contain, majority neutral grain spirit, otherwise known as vodka, and fall into the blend category. But they went on record as saying there's no neutral grain spirit in this whiskey. So everything in here is whiskey, and at least 20% of it is straight whiskey, because that's how the category works. Again, we don't know what's in it. Could be a mix of rye and bourbon, could be malt, who knows? They decided after trying through 50 blends that blend number 40 was the one that they wanted to release, and that's why they named it number 40. And I am a little disappointed they don't give us any information, but that seems to be the way of most of these large corporate brands. They seem to be allergic to transparency and love marketing. So let's smell it. Immediately, what I'm going to argue is probably the bourbon component is the first thing that jumps out, because you get that dusty corn, sweet, cornbready, honey, not quite cherry, but soft tannинed vanilla. But then it's a little bit brittle. Like it gets, just as you start to smell, like, oh, nice, rich depth. Ooh, there's a little bit of a thinness to the nose. And then you get a little bit of that sort of waxy note that some bourbons and some ryes can present, especially Kentucky ryes that lean more bourbon than rye. Overall, it's a simple but nice and comfortable nose. Oh, and the palate is a little more complex than I would have expected for a simple nose. It's not super complex. It does present the exact thing on the palate that it does on the nose, which is kind of nice, this sort of like dusty, corn-forward, slightly tannинed vanilla cream. And it is a little bit dry. Woo! Make that very dry on the finish. The finish just sort of just this, like sugar, but with a little bit of a jaw-curling kind of tannin. That's not sharp, it's soft, but it's dry. This is very simple, approachable, easy drinking, with a little bit of character, just a nice whiskey. If they were going for mass appeal, which according to the dollar amount, which I think this is under $40, and in this like celebrity market, that's pretty rare. So if they're aiming for like, let's get this to the actual whiskey drinkers instead of the collectors, and let's get something that more people can enjoy than not, I think they've nailed it, like right on the head. It wouldn't be my go-to, but it's really nice, and I bet it would be great on the rocks. I'm gonna add a little water and keep telling the story. So you want to get into the whiskey industry. Rule number one, go visit distilleries. If no one knows you, then you're just a random face in the crowd asking for a job. So start visiting distilleries, become a fan, find the one you love, find the one you want to work at, buy their whiskey, go to their events, become a recognizable face for the staff that look forward to seeing you, tip well. If they have any way that you can volunteer, volunteer. And while you're doing that, pay attention to the things that they talk about needing. Because craft distilleries are small mom and pop shops. There's a lot of shop talk that goes on in the tasting rooms of places like that. And the more people know you and feel comfortable, the more they'll share behind the scenes things, and you'll get sort of an insight into like, here's some needs that they have that could be filled. And you might even find out before they are posting a job or asking for help. Bring them business. Sorry, I wanted to see what the water did. Excuse me. And the answer is it didn't change anything. It's still that simple, dusty, slight tannin vanilla, reaching towards caramel. Anyway, so show up, bring friends, become a fixture. And then, this can't be understated, have skills. Like, if you don't know anything about the whiskey industry and you don't understand fermentations and you don't understand marketing or repping or anything like that, then there's, even if they love you, there's no reason for them to connect with you. There's no upside to that, right? But if when you show up and become familiar and a fan, and then they start talking about stuff they need, you go, you know what, actually, I know how to do all of those things, and I would love to help. That puts you right at the top of the list. And the more you can develop those skills in the direction of the thing that you want to do, the better off. You want to be a brand rep? Then show up in the tasting room with friends and rep the whiskey to your friends. They're all going to see that. They're all going to be like, man, this guy is an advocate. And when he talks about our whiskey, he gets it all right. He knows exactly what we do here, and he knows why and who we are. You can't distill legally at home, but you know what you can do is make beer at home. So if you want to get into production, start making beer. One of the hardest parts of production is quality fermentations and grain handling. and it's a pain in the ass, and yeast development and yeast health. These are all things that you can do totally legally at home, and if it works, you can drink the product you've made. So learn fermentations, learn production, learn the parts of the process that you're trying to understand. Go take trainings. Do the Bourbon Stave and Thief program. Do the Bonafide Whiskey program. Do the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy. Learn about whiskey. Know things. But the bottom line is this, because I feel like it's getting a little bit mushy. We always talk about in marketing, win the heart, the mind will follow. You're trying to get customers. Don't go for facts, details, data. Go for winning the heart, the human connection, and then follow with the facts, data, and information so that the mind has somewhere to land. Win the heart, the mind will follow, and then give the mind some food. Yes, you made the right choice. It's no different in trying to crack into an industry. Win people's hearts, their minds follow, and then provide them with substance behind winning the heart, and you got a shot. So, cheers to you and good luck. I'm really glad you're here.